They sold her on a morning that smelled of dust, pine smoke, and quiet disgrace. When the sun was still unsure whether it wanted to rise over the village that had already decided her worth, a worth measured not by her laughter or the small hands that clung to her mother's shawl, but by a curse whispered into every cracked wall and every bowed head. Infertility, a word that had grown heavier with every year. Her parents remained childless until it pressed down on their backs and bent their spirits, until neighbors stopped asking when a baby would come and started asking what sin must have been committed for God to close a womb so tightly, and in that suffocating shame they convinced themselves that the little girl sleeping on the reed mat was not a blessing but a reminder, a living mirror of everything they lacked. Her name was Ilara, though that name was spoken less and less as the years passed, replaced by sighs and silence. And when she woke that morning, she felt the strange tension in the air, the way her mother's hands trembled as she braided her hair too tightly, the way her father would not look at her, staring instead at the door as if hoping it might swallow him whole. She did not understand the murmured conversation, the exchange of coins wrapped in cloth, the promise that this would fix things, that this would finally bring a child of their own, because adults have a cruel way of believing that desperation can be traded, like livestock, and Ilara only understood that she was being taken somewhere, that she was told to be quiet, to be good, to not cry, because crying would make it harder, and she loved her parents, enough to obey even as her chest felt like it was being split open. The man who took her had a rough beard and eyes that slid past her as if she were already gone, and when her mother finally kissed her forehead, the kiss tasted of salt and finality, a farewell disguised as reassurance, and Ilara clung to the edge of her shawl until her fingers were pried loose, one by one, each finger letting go like a small death. The road out of the village was long and uneven, and Ilara walked until her legs ached, until she stopped asking questions because no one answered them. And when they reached the timber road that led into the forest, the man handed her over to another, a broader figure with shoulders like tree trunks and a face carved by years of wind and solitude, a man who smelled of sap and sweat and something else, grief. His name was Rowan, though Ilara would not learn it yet, and he stood there awkwardly as the exchange happened. 4 pairs of small eyes watching from behind the wheels of a worn wagon, eyes that were wary, curious, and hungry in ways that had nothing to do with food. Rowan was a lumberjack, a widower, a man who had lost his wife to a winter fever and been left with 4 children and a house that echoed too loudly at night, and he had not come looking to buy a child, not in the way the village men spoke of it, but to take one in because even grief can make room for compassion, and because he understood what it meant to be judged by what fate had taken away. Ilara did not know any of this as she stood frozen, clutching the small bundle of clothes that were now all she owned, her eyes darting from the wagon to the forest and back again. But she felt something shift when Rowan knelt in front of her, his knees creaking, his hands open and empty as he spoke softly, telling her she was safe, telling her she could come if she wanted, telling her there was food and warmth and children, who argued too much and laughed too loudly, telling her things that sounded like lies, because hope had already betrayed her once that morning. The 4 children stared at her as if she were a strange animal. The oldest, a boy named Finn, squinting with suspicion, the twins Mara and Loon whispering to each other, and the youngest, little Ash, peeking out from behind Rowan's leg with wide eyes, and Ilara wondered if they would hate her, if she would be another mouth they resented, another burden they wished away. The wagon creaked as they started down the forest road, and with every turn, Ilara felt the distance grow between her and the life she had known, a life that had not loved her enough to keep her, and she pressed her face into her knees and cried silently, because she had learned that crying only made things worse. The lumberjack's cabin sat at the edge of the forest, surrounded by towering pines that whispered secrets to the wind, and it was rough and weathered but warm, with smoke curling from the chimney and the smell of stew seeping into the cold air. And as Ilara stepped inside, she was overwhelmed by the noise, the clutter, the presence of life, something she had not realized she had been missing until it wrapped around her like a blanket that was too big but desperately needed. Rowan showed her a small corner by the hearth where she could sleep, apologizing for the lack of space, and Ilara nodded, afraid that if she spoke the wrong words she might be sent away again. And that night she lay awake listening to the breathing of strangers, the crackle of firewood, the distant howl of wolves, and she wondered if this place would break her too. Days passed, then weeks, and Alara learned the rhythms of the lumberjack's life. The early mornings, the heavy boots, the careful way Rowan sharpened his axe as if it were an extension of his own body. The way the children helped with chores, fought, made up, and fought again, and slowly, cautiously, Alara began to exist among them. Not quite belonging, not quite invisible, hovering in the fragile space between. She was given hand-me-down clothes, a wooden spoon of her own, a place at the table, and though the children were wary at first, they could not maintain suspicion in the face of shared hunger and shared laughter, and soon she was running with them through the trees, her laughter echoing off the trunks, startling birds, into flight. Rowan watched this transformation with a quiet ache in his chest, because every smile Alara gave felt like both a gift and a reminder of the family he had lost, and he struggled with the fear that loving her would be another loss waiting to happen. Winter came early that year, heavy snow piling against the cabin, trapping them together in a world of white and wood smoke. And it was during those long evenings that Alara began to tell her story, haltingly at first, then in broken pieces, about the village, the whispers, the way she had felt like a shadow in her own home. And Rowan listened, his jaw tightening, his hands clenching not with anger at her parents, but with sorrow at a world that could make a child feel disposable. One night, as the fire burned low and the children slept, Alara asked the question she had been holding in her chest like a stone, asking if she would have to leave one day, if this too was temporary. And Rowan looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not a burden but a child who had already endured more than many adults. And he told her that as long as she wanted to stay, she had a place there. Words that settled into her bones and began, slowly, to heal the fractures left by betrayal. And if this story is touching something in your heart right now, if you believe that love can be found in the unlikeliest places, remember to subscribe to the channel, because stories like Alara's are reminders that even the deepest wounds can find warmth again.